Accretion, buildup of soil by moving water like a river. Accretion is the natural buildup of soil on a property caused by natural forces like moving water, as in property which borders a river. The moving water picks up soil from one property and deposits it on another. Related words: accession, alluvium, accretion, erosion, avulsion, reliction. CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Most condominium complexes (common interest developments, or CIDs) have a homeowners association (HOA) which abides by a written agreement called CC&Rs (sometimes seen abbreviated CCRs). These are the covenants (promises), conditions, and restrictions of living within the community. The CCRs are the rules of living in the common interest development (like a condominium, for example). The CC&Rs are developed by the association and enforced by the association. Breaching the CCRs can result in disciplinary action like fines, and can even result in the exclusion from the community. CC&Rs are covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Related words: common interest development (CID), homeowners association (HOA). Declaration of Homestead. Form filed with County Clerk declaring a homestead. A homestead is a real property which is used and occupied by its owners as a family home. The term is important because a homestead is protected by law from unsecured creditors. A homestead declaration, or declaration of homestead, filed with the county clerk, officially establishes a property as a homestead. The homestead protections in bankruptcy are from unsecured creditors, that is, things like credit card debt. The homestead exemption does not protect a home from foreclosure from mortgages and trust deeds. These are secured debt, secured by the property. The homestead exemption is limited to protecting the first $75,000 of a home's value from a judgment against the head of household. A mentally or physically disabled person can be protected from unsecured debt judgments up to $150,000. The homestead declaration must be filed prior to the judgment to be valid. Because only one homestead can exist at a time, an abandonment of homestead is the official document which must be filed to reverse a homestead declaration on one home, so that it can be filed on another. Synonyms: homestead declaration. Related words: abandonment of homestead. Condition subsequent. A state with a condition required after the transaction. Fee simple defeasible is another way of saying fee simple qualified. Fee simple qualified is an estate for which the title holder, the grantee, has a fee simple title subject to a condition. If the condition is not met, then the title passes back to the grantor. It is a conditional estate based on that condition. A condition subsequent is a condition that must occur after the transaction, and a condition precedent is a condition that must occur prior to the transaction. The classic example is that of a specific use being required of a property. A man sold his property to the city to use as a library. Years later, the city stopped using the property as a library, and the man's heirs demanded the property back. The man's family regained title because the title held by the city was a fee simple defeasible / qualified title, and the condition subsequent was that the property be used as a library. Just as a contrast, a fee simple absolute is a transfer with no conditions. Related words: fee simple qualified, fee simple defeasible, estate in fee, freehold estate. Notice to pay or quit. 3-day notice to a tenant in breach of paying rent or leave. When a tenant fails to abide by the lease, there is a process to follow to either gain compliance or remove the tenant, parentheses called eviction, end parentheses. The notice to pay or quit is the first step in the eviction process. The notice to pay or quit gives the tenant 3 days to comply or move out. If the tenant does neither, the next step is to file an unlawful detainer action, parentheses, also called an action in ejectment, in parentheses. The unlawful detainer action is simply a form filed with the municipal court. For an extra fee, this form could be served on the tenant by the service provider of the court, which is typically the sheriff. After the tenant is served, the tenant has 5 days to move out or respond to the court. If the tenant fails to do this, then the next step is to go back to the court and ask for a writ of possession, which the judge will grant given no response from the tenant. Again, the writ of possession needs to be served on the tenant, and 5 days later, the sheriff can physically remove the tenant. The notice to pay or quit is the initial notification to the tenant to either abide by the lease, pay the rent, or move out. Synonyms: eviction notice. Related words: eviction. Alluvium. Gradually built up layer of soil. Alluvium is gradually built up layer of soil, and the word always makes me think of geology class. We use the word strata to describe the effect of alluvium being deposited over thousands, millions, and even billions of years. Soil might be moved by wind or water, a tiny bit at a time. If time-lapse photography could be employed over the millennium, we could see that alluvium is a buildup of soil. Related words: strata, accretion, accession, avulsion, reliction. Easement by necessity. Right to use land of another to reach landlocked property. An easement is a right to use the land of another owner. In an easement, there is a dominant tenement and a servient tenement. The dominant tenement receives the benefit of the easement, and the servient tenement bears the burden of the easement. An easement, by necessity, is created when a piece of land cannot be reached except by crossing another property, parentheses. This is called a, quote, landlocked, end quote, property, end parentheses. The easement by necessity only exists as long as the landlocked problem exists. An easement by necessity is the right to use the land of another owner to reach a landlocked property. Involuntary lien. Forcibly taking an interest in the property of another. A lien is an interest in the property of someone other than the owner. A mortgage or a trust deed is an owner who willingly uses his property as security for a loan. This would be a voluntary lien because the owner has willingly given the bank an interest in the property. An involuntary lien is when an ownership interest in the property other than the owner is forced on the owner. A tax lien, for example, is when the government forcibly takes an interest in a property because of unpaid taxes. A mechanic's lien, for example, is when a supplier takes an interest in a property because the owner has not paid the supplier. All forms of liens are encumbrances. An involuntary lien is when another forcibly takes an interest in the real property of another. Antonyms: voluntary lien, trust deed, mortgage. Related words: lien. Misrepresentation. Making false statements or hiding material information. Misrepresentation is part of a list of improper interactions in and around real estate, parentheses, and other, end parentheses, transactions. The list includes misrepresentation, fraud, mistake, duress, menace, and undue influence. Misrepresentation is making a false statement or hiding a material fact or information. Fraud is lying with the intent to steal. A mistake is a legal word which means there is lack of clarity within the agreement or there is a misunderstanding of the facts. Menace is the threat of violence, and duress is the feeling that menace produces. Undue influence is somehow using an unfair advantage over another person. All of these improper transactions work to undermine mutual consent, or the meeting of the minds, which is one of the four components of a lawful contract. Parentheses, a valid contract requires legally competent parties, mutual consent, lawful object, and acceptable consideration, end parentheses. Misrepresentation is making a false statement or hiding a material fact or information. Related words: mutual consent, mutual assent, genuine assent, meeting of the minds, continued misrepresentation. Drywall. Paper laminated gypsum wall building material. Drywall is the common name for a building material used to cover interior walls of residential and office structures made of double-sided paper laminated gypsum. Gypsum is a soft white mineral consisting of hydrated calcium sulfate. In general, drywall comes in 3/8 and 5/8 inch thicknesses. The 5/8 has a 1-hour fire rating used for the wall between the garage and the home. Drywall can be screwed to 2x4 wall studs or larger ceiling joists to make a good surface for texturing and painting. Drywall is typically sold at building material stores and home centers and comes in 4x8 and 4x12 foot sheets.